Cook for about 10 minutes, browning nicely underneath. Then turn them and brown the other side. When cool, split, toast, and butter. Graham muffins. Heat to the boiling point 2 cups of milk, add a tablespoon of butter and stir until melted. Sift 2 cups of whole wheat flour, 1/2 cup of white flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Pour on the milk and butter, beat, add the yolks of 2 eggs well beaten, then the stiffly beaten whites. Bake in hot greased gem pans. Hominy muffins. Sift twice together 1 1/2 cups of flour, 3 level teaspoons of baking powder, 1 level tablespoon of sugar, and 1 saltspoon of salt. To 1 cup of boiled hominy, add 2 tablespoons of melted butter and 1 cup of milk. Add to the dry ingredients and beat. Then add 2 well-beaten eggs. Pour the batter into hot greased gem pans and bake. Muffins. Sift a saltspoon of salt, 2 level teaspoons of baking powder, and 2 cups of flour together. Beat the yolks of 2 eggs, add 1 cup of milk, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and the dry ingredients. Beat, add lightly the stiffly beaten whites of 2 eggs. Fill hot buttered gem pans 2/3 full and bake in a hot oven. Quick muffins in rings. Beat 2 eggs, yolks and whites separately. Add to the yolks 2 cups of milk, 1 level teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of melted butter, and 2 cups of flour in which 2 level teaspoons of baking powder have been sifted, and last the stiffly beaten whites of the eggs. When well mixed, bake in greased muffin rings on a hot griddle. Turn over when risen and set, as both sides must be browned. Boiled rice muffins. To make muffins with cooked rice, sift 2 1/4 cups of flour twice with 5 level teaspoons of baking powder, 1 rounding tablespoon of sugar, and a saltspoon of salt. Put in 1 well-beaten egg, 1/2 cup of milk, and 3/4 cup of boiled rice mixed with another 1/2 cup of milk and 2 tablespoons of melted butter. Beat well, pour into hot gem pans, and bake. Boston brown bread. To make 1 loaf, sift together 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup rye meal, and 1 cup of graham flour, with 3/4 cup of molasses and 1 3/4 cup sweet milk. Add 1/2 teaspoonful of soda dissolved in warm water. Turn into a well-buttered mold, which may be a 5-pound lard pail if no other mold is handy. Set on something that will keep mold from bottom of kettle, and turn enough boiling water to come halfway up to the mold. Cover the kettle and keep the kettle boiling steadily for 3 1/2 hours. If water boils away, add enough boiling water to keep the same amount of water in kettle. Put in molds and cut when cool. Crisp white corn cake. 2 cups scalded milk, 1 cup white cornmeal, 2 level teaspoons salt. Mix the salt and cornmeal and add gradually the hot milk. When well mixed, pour into a buttered dripping pan and bake in a moderate oven until crisp. Serve cut in squares. The mixture should not be more than 1/4 inch deep when poured into pan. Croutons. Croutons made coarsely are no addition to a soup. For the best sort, cut out stale bread into 1/2-inch slices, spread with butter, then trim away the crust. Cut into small cubes, put into a pan and set in a hot oven. If the croutons incline to brown unevenly, shake the pan. Egg bread. 1 pint of boiling water, 1/2 pint white cornmeal, 2 teaspoons salt, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, 2 eggs, 1 cup milk. Bake in a moderate oven. Graham bread. Put 1 cup of scalded and cooled milk, 1 cup of water, 2 cups of flour, and 1/2 yeast cake dissolved in 1 cup of lukewarm water into a bowl and let rise overnight. In the morning, add a level teaspoon of salt, 2 rounding cups of graham flour, and 1/2 cup sugar. Beat well, put into 2 pans, and let rise until light and bake 1 hour. Nut bread. 1 1/2 cups of white flour, 2 cups of graham flour, 1/2 cup of cornmeal, 1/2 cup of brown sugar and molasses, 1 pint of sweet milk, 1 cup of chopped walnuts, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Bake in a long pan for 3/4 of an hour. Oatmeal bread. Over a pint of rolled oats, pour a quart of boiling water. When cool, add 1 teaspoonful suet, 1 teaspoon butter, 1/2 cup of molasses, and 1/2 yeast cake dissolved in a little water. Stir this thoroughly, and then add 2 quarts sifted flour. Do not knead this and allow it to rise overnight, and in the morning stir it again, and then put it in well-buttered bread pans. Let it rise until it fills the pans and then bake in a moderate oven. It takes a little longer to bake than white bread. Oatmeal bread. Cook 1 cup of rolled oats in water for serving at breakfast, and 1 cup of molasses, 1 1/2 cups of lukewarm water in which is dissolved 1 yeast cake and 1 teaspoon of salt. Mix in enough flour to make a stiff dough, cover and let rise. When very light, stir down, put in pans, let rise light, and bake in a slow oven. The heat should be sufficient at first to check the rising, then the baking should be slow. Oriental oatmeal bread. Take 2 cupfuls of rolled oats, put in bread pan, turn on 4 cupfuls of boiling water, stir for a while. Add, while hot, a heaping tablespoonful of lard, or 1 scant tablespoonful of butter and 1 of lard, 2 teaspoonfuls of salt, and 4 tablespoonfuls of sugar, and 3 of molasses. Now add 2 cupfuls of cold water, making 6 cups of water in all, and if cool enough, add 1 yeast cake dissolved in a very little water. Now stir in all the white flour it will take until it is as stiff as you can manage it with the spoon. Set in warm place overnight, and in the morning with spoon and knife fill your tins part full, let rise to nearly top of pan, then bake an hour for medium-sized loaves. Raisin bread. Scald 3 cups of milk and add 1 teaspoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Cool and add 1/2 yeast cake dissolved in 1/4 cup of lukewarm water. Mix in enough flour to make a drop batter and set to rise. When this sponge is light, put in 2 cups of seeded raisins and enough flour to make a soft dough, but stiff enough to knead. Let rise again, then mold into 2 loaves. Let the loaves double in size and bake slowly, covering with another pan for the first 20 minutes of baking. Steamed brown bread. Beat 1 egg light, add 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup rye meal, and 1 1/2 cups of sifted flour with a half level teaspoon of salt. Add 1 cup of molasses, and after it is turned out, put in 1 level teaspoon of soda and fill with boiling water. Add to the other 1/3 cup more of the water. Pour into well-buttered mold and steam 4 hours. Southern corn cake. Mix 2 cups of white cornmeal, a rounding tablespoon of sugar, and a level teaspoon of salt. Then pour enough hot milk and water to moisten the meal well, but not to make it of a soft consistency. Let stand until cool, then add 3 well-beaten eggs and spread on a buttered shallow pan about 1/2 inch thick. Bake in a quick oven, cut in squares, split and butter while hot. Steamed cornbread. Sift together 1 cup of cornmeal and flour and a level teaspoon of salt. Put 1 level teaspoon soda in 1 tablespoon of water. Add to 1/2 cup of molasses and stir into the meal with 1 2/3 cups of milk. Beat and turn into a greased mold. Steam 4 hours, take off the lid of the mold and set in the oven 15 minutes. Steamed graham bread. Put into a mixing bowl 2 cups of sour milk, 1 cup of molasses, 1 level teaspoon of salt, 2 of soda, and then enough graham flour to make a batter as stiff as can be stirred with a spoon, adding 1/2 cup of seeded raisins. Pour into a 2-quart mold or lard pail well greased, cover closely, and set in a kettle of boiling water that comes 2/3 the depth of the mold. Cover the kettle and keep the water